Buffalo Creek Valley, Montana Territory, September 1883. As autumn's golden light bathed the newly established settlement, Jacob Thornton continued methodically constructing what his neighbors had come to call the cabin with two front doors. While other settlers completed their dwellings with single entry points according to standard frontier specifications, Thornton, 42 years old and carrying the weathered competence of a New Hampshire carpenter, insisted on building what appeared to be an unnecessary room between his cabin's interior and the outside world. The source of community bewilderment centered on Thornton's vestibule, a 4 4 4 5 foot enclosed space positioned between two solid oak doors, consuming 20 square feet of what most settlers considered a precious interior living area. The outer door, constructed of 2-inch thick oak planks with specialized iron hinges imported at considerable expense, opened outward to prevent snow blockage. The inner door, equally substantial, opened inward into the main cabin space. Between them stood the vestibule, essentially a small room requiring an additional 180 board feet of milled lumber, specialized weather stripping, and intricate joint work that had already consumed 11 days of construction time. Samuel Reeves, whose own cabin followed conventional Montana Territory construction methods with a single 3-inch thick pine door, found himself walking over daily to observe Thornton's progress with increasing skepticism. "That man's building himself a house just for his front door," he told his wife Margaret one evening, shaking his head as he watched Thornton carefully fitting another specialized hinge. "Waste of good lumber and space, if you ask me." The criticism carried weight in a community where every square foot of interior space meant the difference between cramped discomfort and adequate living conditions through the brutal Montana winters. Hans Gustafsson, the settlement's Swedish carpenter who had immigrated 17 years earlier, brought professional authority to the growing skepticism. Gustafsson's credentials were unquestionable. He had built over 30 frontier structures throughout the territory, each following traditional Scandinavian methods adapted for American materials. "I've built cabins from Minnesota to Oregon," Gustafsson declared to anyone within earshot. "One good door with proper sealing is all any family needs." Thornton is either building a fort or doesn't understand frontier priorities. The mathematical burden of Thornton's design became increasingly apparent as September progressed. Where standard cabin entries required approximately 45 board feet of lumber and 2 days of construction, Thornton's double entry system demanded 225 board feet and nearly 2 weeks of specialized carpentry. The additional 180 board feet represented a significant expense in both materials and labor, resources that other settlers dedicated to interior comforts or storage spaces. Settlement leader William Baxter, a former military engineer whose Civil War experience had taught him the value of efficient resource allocation, watched Thornton's project with growing concern. Baxter had founded the Buffalo Creek settlement in 1881 by applying practical construction principles to frontier development. Build quickly, conserve materials, follow proven methods. Thornton's approach violated every tenet of frontier pragmatism. Come February, Baxter predicted to the assembled men at the settlement's weekly meeting, he'll wish he had those 20 square feet for living space instead of an oversized doorway. The criticism intensified as neighboring families moved into completed cabins, while Thornton continued his meticulous door and vestibule construction. Reeves's cabin, built according to standard specifications, featured a straightforward entry with woolen fabric draft stoppers, surrounded by ample living space for his family of 5. Gustafsson's own dwelling showcased professional carpentry, with a tightly fitted Swedish-style door that promised adequate protection against winter winds. Baxter's cabin demonstrated military efficiency in its construction timeline, completed in exactly 5 weeks with materials calculated to avoid waste. Yet Thornton persisted with quiet determination that puzzled his neighbors. When questioned about his methods, he offered only brief explanations that revealed knowledge sources unfamiliar to most frontier builders. "Cold enters in gusts, not steady streams," he told Reeves during one of their conversations. "A vestibule is like a fortress moat for winter air. The analogy seemed theoretical at best, but the practical reality of sacrificing 20 square feet of interior living space for unproven weatherproofing benefits struck most settlers as impractical experimentation they could ill afford as Montana's legendary winter approached. By early October 1883, as Buffalo Creek Valley's cottonwoods turned golden against Montana's azure skies, the technical principles underlying Jacob Thornton's controversial double-entry door system began emerging through conversations with curious neighbors. The vestibule concept, Thornton explained, relied on fundamental properties of air pressure and thermal transfer that few frontier builders had formally studied, but which his New Hampshire upbringing had taught him through brutal experience. Air moves from high pressure to low pressure, he explained to Sarah Collins, the settlement's school teacher, who had begun documenting construction techniques as part of her frontier development records. When you open a single door in winter, you create an instant pathway for all your heated air to escape and the freezing air to rush in. The pressure exchange happens in seconds. The scientific principles, while straightforward to modern understanding, represented specialized knowledge in frontier construction. Standard cabin doors allowed direct air exchange between interior and exterior environments, creating an immediate temperature equalization that forced occupants to continuously rebuild thermal conditions after every entry and exit. Measurements taken during Thornton's demonstrations showed that opening a conventional door for just 15 seconds in 20-degree weather could drop a cabin's interior temperature by 8 degrees Fahrenheit, requiring approximately 30 minutes of additional fire to restore. Thornton's vestibule system, by contrast, created a pressure buffer zone that prevented direct exchange between interior and exterior environments. By entering the 4-arced 5-foot vestibule and closing the exterior door before opening the interior door, occupants allowed the extreme pressure differential to equalize within the buffer zone rather than the living space. His early season tests showed that this method reduced whole cabin temperature drops to just 2 degrees Fahrenheit during entry and exit. The knowledge sources behind Thornton's innovation gradually emerged through evening conversations around the settlement's communal fire pit. His father, Ephraim Thornton, had spent 45 winters in New Hampshire's White Mountains, learning through trial and error that entryway design determined winter survival more than any other single factor. Scandinavian immigrants in the northeastern logging camps had shared their traditional sluisvind construction techniques during Jacob's apprenticeship years, demonstrating principles of air pressure management that European cold weather cultures had refined over centuries. William Baxter, despite his continued skepticism, found himself drawn to these technical discussions. His military engineering training had taught him to evaluate building techniques based on measurable outcomes rather than traditional practices. The theory seems sound, he admitted grudgingly to Hans Gustafsson after one of Thornton's explanations, but at what cost to practical living space? Gustafsson's professional interest began overcoming his initial dismissal as he recognized elements from his Swedish upbringing. My grandmother's house had something similar, he acknowledged, though not so elaborate. We called it a wind porch. The mathematical burden of Thornton's design remained the community's primary concern as November's first light snows dusted Buffalo Creek Valley. The vestibule's 20 square feet represented approximately 8% of the typical frontier cabin's 250 square feet of interior living space. For the Reeves family with 3 children, such a sacrifice seemed impractical, despite potential thermal benefits. Samuel continued maintaining that good chinking, a proper door, and plenty of firewood had served frontier families for generations without sacrificing precious interior space. As early winter temperatures began regularly dropping below freezing, the settlement established informal monitoring of heating efficiency across various cabins. Sarah Collins, whose educational background included rudimentary scientific method, began recording morning and evening temperatures using 3 identical mercury thermometers. Initial readings showed modest but consistent differences. Thornton's cabin maintained interior temperatures 5 and 8 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than identical-sized cabins with similar firewood consumption. It's warmer, Gustafsson acknowledged after inspecting the cabin in mid-November. But is it worth sacrificing a child's sleeping area or valuable storage space? The mathematics of frontier living requires difficult choices. The first substantial snowfall in late November created conditions for more meaningful comparison. With temperatures dropping to 5 degrees Fahrenheit and winds gusting to 30 miles per hour, the settlement experienced its first genuine winter challenge. Families huddled near fireplaces, burning precious early-season wood reserves as they adjusted to Montana's harsh realities. As neighbors visited one another during brief breaks in the storm, the temperature differential between Thornton's cabin and others became increasingly noticeable, a harbinger of the dramatic validation that approaching winter would soon provide. December 1883 brought sustained cold to Buffalo Creek Valley, creating conditions that revealed the growing differences between conventional frontier cabins and Thornton's double-entry door system. Sarah Collins, continuing her methodical temperature documentation, recorded morning readings that surprised even the most skeptical settlers. While standard cabins averaged 42 degrees Celsius interior temperatures, despite all-night fires, Thornton's dwelling consistently maintained 55 degrees C with identical firewood consumption. The operational protocols of Thornton's vestibule became a focal point of community interest as its practical benefits emerged. Each entry and exit required a simple but strict procedure. Open outer door, enter vestibule, close outer door, completely before opening inner door. This method prevented the direct air exchange that plagued conventional cabins, where every door opening sent frigid air rushing across the entire interior space. "It's like having a guard at your door stopping the cold from barging in," explained Thornton to the Reeves children, who had begun visiting frequently to experience the remarkable warmth. "The cold air gets trapped in this small room instead of taking over your whole house." The mathematical advantages became increasingly apparent through daily measurement. Standard cabin doors created immediate temperature drops of 12 to 15 degrees during entries, requiring approximately 45 minutes of additional fire to recover. Thornton's system limited these drops to 3-4 degrees with recovery times under 10 minutes. For families entering and exiting multiple times daily, these differences translated to substantial firewood savings. Thornton's monthly consumption measured 1.2 cords compared to the settlement average of 2.1 cords. Hans Gustafsson, whose professional reputation had initially prevented him from openly acknowledging the system's merits, began spending evenings examining the construction details. The Swedish carpenter measured air movement using smoke patterns from a pipe, watching how differently the smoke behaved in Thornton's vestibule compared to standard doorways. "In my country, old people knew about this," Gustafson admitted reluctantly. "But I thought it wasteful for American frontier conditions. I see now there is wisdom here." Samuel Reeves remained unconvinced, despite evidence accumulating through December. His family's cabin, though requiring substantially more firewood, maintained adequate, if uneven, heating through continuous fire management. "A man needs room to live," he insisted, "not fancy entryways." The visual evidence of heating efficiency differences became increasingly apparent as December progressed. Frost patterns on windows told the story clearly. Standard cabins showed heavy interior frost extending 8 to 10 inches from window edges, while Thornton's windows displayed only a thin 2-inch border. Water buckets required breaking surface ice each morning in conventional dwellings, while Thornton's remained unfrozen even during the coldest nights. William Baxter, whose military engineering background valued measurable outcomes, began documenting the comparative performance. His calculations showed that Thornton's sacrifice of 20 square feet to vestibule space translated to heating approximately 230 square feet, with the same fuel required for 180 square feet in standard construction, a 28% efficiency improvement. "The mathematics are becoming compelling," Baxter acknowledged during a community meeting mid-month. "If current trends continue, we may need to reconsider our building standards." Sarah Collins's scientific documentation provided the most convincing evidence. Her temperature charts showed consistent 12 to 15 degree F advantages in Thornton's cabin during morning readings, advantages that increased as ambient temperatures dropped. These differences translated directly to comfort metrics, affecting daily frontier life, ability to work without gloves indoors, children's health, food preparation conditions, and sleeping comfort. The Christmas week forecast delivered by a passing mail carrier brought news that would soon transform skepticism into urgent interest. A massive Arctic system had formed across Canada and was pushing southward, promising temperatures unlike anything the relatively new settlement had experienced. "They're saying 40 below with driving winds," the carrier reported. "Coldest in 20 years, according to old-timers up north. You folks best prepare yourselves." As Buffalo Creek settlers hurriedly cut additional firewood and sealed cabin gaps with whatever materials they could find, the approaching weather system promised to provide the ultimate test of competing construction methods, a validation far more convincing than any theoretical discussion or modest temperature difference. January 10th, 1884, brought apocalyptic conditions to Buffalo Creek Valley as the predicted Arctic front slammed into the Montana Territory with unprecedented force. Temperatures plummeted to 42 degrees, while winds gusted to 53 miles per hour, creating wind chill conditions that made exposed skin freeze in less than 30 seconds. The blizzard's initial assault tested every cabin's construction quality beyond any normal winter threshold, revealing vulnerabilities that theoretical discussions could never identify. Within 24 hours, the settlement faced a genuine survival crisis. Samuel Reeves abandoned his family's bedroom after temperatures there dropped to 3 degrees despite continuous fire maintenance. His wife Margaret moved their 3 children to pallets directly beside the fireplace, the only space in their cabin maintaining temperatures above freezing. Their water barrel froze solid, despite being positioned just 5 feet from roaring flames, and frost accumulated a quarter-inch thick on interior walls throughout their dwelling. Dutch Gustafson's professionally constructed cabin fared marginally better due to superior Scandinavian chinking techniques, but even his family retreated to a single room after finding bedroom temperatures had plunged to 8 degrees overnight. His carefully crafted single door, despite wool ceiling and tight construction, allowed devastating cold infiltration with each necessary entry or exit. Ice formed inside door frames and window casings throughout his cabin, and his weekly firewood allocation disappeared in just 2 days of desperate heating attempts. William Baxter faced the most serious leadership challenge of his settlement tenure. 3 families reported dangerous overnight temperatures below 10 degrees Shire in their sleeping areas, forcing consolidation into communal sleeping arrangements around single heat sources. Firewood consumption throughout the community reached catastrophic levels as desperate residents maintained continuous maximum fires that barely affected ambient room temperatures beyond 6 feet from the fireplace. Several children developed coughing and early frostbite symptoms, despite remaining indoors, and elderly residents reported inability to sleep due to intense cold. The Thornton cabin stood as a remarkable contrast to the settlement's suffering. Interior temperatures maintained between 35 to 40 degrees throughout the dwelling, with the area near his fireplace reaching a comfortable 52 degrees. His family continued normal sleeping arrangements in designated bedrooms rather than huddling around the hearth, and their water supply remained unfrozen even overnight. Most significantly, Thornton's firewood consumption measured just 40% of what his neighbors required, allowing sustainable heating without the desperate conservation measures consuming other families. The dramatic visual contrast became undeniable by January 15th. Steam rose from Thornton's chimney at regular intervals throughout the day, while neighboring cabins showed continuous smoke plumes from non-stop maximum fires. When Thornton opened his outer vestibule door, only a small cloud of condensation escaped, compared to the billowing vapor that erupted from conventional cabins during entries, visible evidence of catastrophic heat loss with each door opening. Margaret Reeves, watching through frost-covered windows as her children shivered despite proximity to dangerous flames, observed Thornton's family moving normally throughout their cabin, wearing single layers of clothing. The contrast between their situations had transformed from theoretical comparison to matter of survival versus suffering. By January 18th, the crisis deepened as another Arctic surge brought temperatures to 47 degrees Celsius. Two families could no longer maintain survivable temperatures and temporarily relocated to Baxter's cabin, creating overcrowded conditions that strained everyone's resources and patience. Dutch Gustafson acknowledged that his professional expertise had reached its limits, admitting that conventional single-door construction simply could not handle such extreme conditions, regardless of craftsmanship quality. The turning point came on January 19th, when Thornton invited community members to witness his system's performance. Neighbors entering his vestibule experienced the principle in action. The small transitional space felt noticeably cold at around 20 degrees Celsius, but when they passed through the inner door, the 38 degrees Celsius main cabin felt remarkably warm by comparison. Hans Gustafsson conducted professional measurements that revealed the scientific principles at work. Using a mercury thermometer, he documented that opening the outer door dropped the vestibule temperature from 27 degrees to 30 degrees, but the main cabin remained at 38 degrees. When both doors were accidentally opened simultaneously during the demonstration, the main cabin temperature plummeted 18 degrees Celsius in seconds, precisely illustrating the protection the vestibule provided during normal operation. The difference isn't just comfort, Baxter observed, watching visible breath patterns inside conventional cabins compared to their absence in Thornton's dwelling. It's survival versus suffering. 20 square feet of space for 30 degrees of warmth begins looking like mathematics no frontier settler can ignore. February 1884 marked the beginning of transformation throughout Buffalo Creek Valley as the settlement recovered from January's brutal Arctic assault. Samuel Reeves, who had spent the final week of the blizzard sheltering his family in Thornton's cabin after his own home became dangerously cold, began dismantling his front entrance before the snow had fully melted. The man who had once dismissed the vestibule as wasteful now worked feverishly to replicate the system that had protected his neighbors, while his own children shivered. "I'll sacrifice 20 square feet to keep my family warm," Reeves declared as he measured lumber for his new vestibule. "No amount of extra living space matters if you can't survive in it." Hans Gustafsson approached the conversion with professional thoroughness, developing standardized plans that improved upon Thornton's original design. The Swedish carpenter incorporated additional weatherproofing techniques from his homeland, creating a hybrid system that combined American frontier materials with European cold-weather construction principles. His detailed drawings specified 405-foot dimensions, precisely aligned door frames to prevent air leakage, and specialized hinges that ensured complete seals when closed. "We must make this standard for all Buffalo Creek buildings," Gustafson announced at the February community meeting. What I witnessed in Thornton's cabin wasn't just improvement. It was the difference between suffering and safety. William Baxter organized a formal community retrofit program, applying his military logistics experience to systematically upgrade every settlement dwelling before the next winter. His calculations showed that each vestibule required approximately 180 board feet of lumber, 12 pounds of specialized hardware, and 6 to 8 days of labor. These resource requirements created immediate supply challenges, as the settlement's lumber reserves had been allocated for spring expansion rather than winter modifications. Sarah Collins continued documenting comparative metrics that provided compelling evidence for the vestibule program. Her final January temperature readings showed that during the worst of the blizzard, conventional cabins maintained average interior temperatures of 8 degrees Celsius despite continuous maximum fires, while Thornton's cabin never dropped below 35 degrees with normalized fire maintenance. These 27-degree differences translated directly to health outcomes. No illness reported in the Thornton household, versus 6 cases of cold-related respiratory infections and 2 frostbite incidents among families in conventional dwellings. The economic analysis proved equally convincing. Thornton's firewood consumption during January measured 2.8 cords, compared to the settlement average of 7.3 cords, a 62% reduction that translated to approximately 16 fewer days of dangerous winter woodcutting per family. When calculated against the typical 7-year frontier cabin lifespan, the vestibule's construction costs would be recovered through firewood savings alone within 2 winters, not counting incalculable health and comfort benefits. By mid-March, 7 cabins had completed vestibule retrofits despite challenging winter construction conditions. Families reported immediate temperature improvements even during moderate cold snaps, with average interior temperature increases of 12 to 15 degrees using identical firewood loads. The settlement's remaining 5 dwellings had vestibules under construction. Scheduled for completion before April's mud season would make lumber transport difficult. Adaptation of the system for various cabin configurations presented unique challenges that community collaboration helped solve. Corner entry cabins required modified vestibule shapes to accommodate directional considerations. Smaller dwellings developed space-saving 3A4 foot designs that sacrificed some efficiency for practicality. Larger family homes incorporated dual-purpose vestibules that included storage capabilities while maintaining thermal barrier functions. The process revealed additional benefits beyond temperature regulation. Vestibules provided transitional spaces where settlers could remove snow-covered outer clothing before entering living areas, dramatically reducing interior moisture problems that had previously created mold and dampness issues throughout winter months. The enclosed entry spaces also served as effective mudrooms during spring thaws, keeping cabin interiors cleaner and drier during Montana's notoriously messy transition seasons. As April's warming temperatures finally allowed normal outdoor activities, the settlement's transformation stood as visual testimony to practical frontier innovation. Every Buffalo Creek cabin now featured the distinctive double-door vestibule that had once been ridiculed as wasteful experimentation. The structures represented not just physical modifications, but fundamental shifts in understanding about frontier construction principles. The recognition that strategic space allocation could dramatically improve survival prospects during Montana's brutal winters. "We sacrifice square footage to gain heat," Baxter observed during the settlement's spring planning meeting. Thornton understood that some space isn't meant for living in. It's meant for protecting the space you do live in. By 1885, the Buffalo Creek double entry had spread beyond the immediate settlement to neighboring Montana communities. Traveling merchants carried tales of the remarkable temperature differences achieved through vestibule construction, and families who had suffered through brutal winters eagerly adopted the proven innovation. Within 5 years of Thornton's initial construction, survey records documented over 200 double-entry systems throughout the Montana Territory, transforming frontier architecture through practical validation rather than theoretical endorsement. Hans Gustafsson's professional reputation flourished as he refined the system into standardized designs, adaptable to various frontier dwelling types. His detailed construction manuals, illustrated with precise measurements and material specifications, circulated throughout Western territories as essential guides for cold weather survival. The Gustafsson method, as it came to be known, standardized vestibule dimensions at 4 or 5 feet for typical family cabins, with specific modifications for larger homesteads or specialized structures. The Montana Territorial Report of 1889 officially recognized the innovation's impact, noting that settlements employing double-entry construction reported 43% fewer cold weather injuries and illnesses compared to conventional frontier architecture. These health improvements correlated directly with ambient temperature measurements showing that vestibule-equipped cabins maintained interior conditions 25-30 degrees Celsius warmer than standard construction during severe weather events, a difference that territorial health officials described as the margin between mere survival and dignified frontier living. Federal land management surveys from 1890-1895 documented the innovations spread throughout the Northern Territories, noting a 30% reduction in winter firewood consumption in regions where double-entry construction had become standard practice. This environmental impact represented preservation of approximately 1,200 acres of forest annually throughout Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas, an unintended conservation effect from a single carpenter's determination to build differently. William Baxter's military connections helped incorporate the design into official Army Corps of Engineers frontier construction guidelines by 1892. The standardized military specifications called for properly constructed transitional entry chambers for all cold weather outposts, acknowledging that the double entry system has demonstrated superiority for maintaining operational effectiveness during extreme conditions. These military endorsements carried significant weight as settlers and administrators sought authoritative guidance for frontier development. By 1900, architectural evolution had transformed the utilitarian vestibule into what became known as the Montana Mudroom, an essential frontier home feature that served multiple practical functions beyond thermal regulation. These spaces incorporated boot benches, coat hooks, and storage areas that acknowledged the vestibule's year-round utility as a transitional space between outdoor and indoor environments. The functional expansion preserved the fundamental thermal barrier principles while enhancing daily frontier living practicality. The historical validation of Thornton's innovation emerged through scientific studies conducted decades after his initial construction. The University of Montana's 1910 Frontier Architecture Assessment confirmed the precise mechanisms that made the double-entry system effective. Their technical analysis demonstrated that conventional single-door entries allowed complete air exchange within 7 to 10 seconds of opening, while properly constructed vestibules limited this exchange to the buffer zone, reducing hold-dwelling heat loss by approximately 64% during normal winter operations. Jacob Thornton himself had moved further west by 1905, leaving behind not just physical structures, but a fundamental shift in frontier construction philosophy. His simple innovation challenged the prevalent frontier mentality that equated maximum interior square footage with optimal living conditions, proving instead that strategic space allocation could dramatically improve survival prospects during harsh winters. The 20 square feet he wasted on a vestibule had saved countless families from suffering through Montana's brutal cold. The legacy continued into modern American architecture as the vestibule concept evolved into standard features in cold weather construction. What frontier settlers once mocked as wasteful experimentation became recognized as essential design wisdom. The understanding that transitional spaces between indoor and outdoor environments serve crucial functions beyond mere entry and exit. Contemporary energy efficiency experts would later identify this principle as one of the most significant traditional building techniques validated by modern thermal analysis. Sarah Collins, who documented the original Buffalo Creek transformation, perhaps captured the innovation's significance most clearly in her 1915 memoir, Frontier Development. What Thornton understood and what his neighbors learned through bitter experience was that frontier survival depended not on following convention, but on careful observation of natural principles. His vestibule wasn't just a room between doors. It was a deliberate interface between opposing environments, a carefully designed buffer that transformed winter survival through the simplest of innovations, a space designed not for living, but for protection.